Is it the Tobiator? Is that the name? Did I say that right? Yeah.
Crunching sound,
Good.
that's the bird going to sleep behind me here on the chair.
I see. Yeah.
She's grinding her beak as she goes to sleep.
Oh my goodness. That's wild and crazy.
At least
Yeah.
she's not chewing on the visor, so.
Yep. Oh dear. Ah, Senpai. Senpai? Love me. Welcome.
I love those glasses.
Yeah, isn't that great? Yeah.
I
She
like
looked
it, yeah.
so upbeat and cheerful and everything.
Reminds me of a superhero.
Yeah. Hi, Lance. Welcome.
I had a question. Is there gonna be like a Q&A section in this, or is this just straight up like you're just having like a?
Oh yes, we're going to have Q&A later on. Toward the last part of it. Yeah, you'll definitely Q&A. Lots of opportunity for interaction. Bet.
Oh.
Yeah. There's Diamond, Margie. Hi. How you doing? Good to see ya.
Good to see you too. Glad to be here. Excited
And
about
there's
this
Mark,
presentation.
the famous Mark. How you doing there, mate? Yep, good. It turns out Mark over here on Brittan, over here on the right. And yeah, that's Mark. And Mark is the one who created this space and for us that we get to inhabit. So he's the architect and the builder and things like that. So he's a pretty cool dude. Definitely.
So Tom, just a heads up, it's 2 minutes after 2. Maybe we'll wait 1 more minute and then we'll
Okay,
get going.
sounds good. Sounds like a plan. We have folks still arriving. There's our VR girl. Hey.
Okay, everyone, why don't we get started? Well, we're so excited at the beginning of a virtual World Society Fireside Chat. These are always epic events. So you guys are about to experience, if you've been here before, you already know about the awesomeness. If you haven't, be prepared. These are just some of the most wonderful conversations that happen here in AltSpace. I'm Donna McTee, and I volunteer with Educators in VR, and I'm just thrilled to invite you or to welcome you to this event today. Educators in VR is produces this, and I know that Laurel, who is co-founder, is in the room, and I saw it up on the balcony, and I saw Daniel earlier, but I'm not sure that Daniel's here right now.
He's here.
Is
He's recording.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so we'll just I just wanted to introduce them. I just want to give you just let you know that as soon as we start this presentation, we are going to mute everyone in the audience. We all wear different devices, you guys, and mics are so sensitive. My dog in my basement constantly provides music in the background for events that I host, so I'll be muted with you. What we'll do is when we do the Q&A at any point during the event, if we do a Q&A, you will see a raise hand button down to the bottom right, and you'll be invited to click that and get in a queue for questions, just so you know that we have the main floor, but we also have the balcony. And so you can, for those of you who want a little bit of elbow space, you can head up on stage. Conversation with your guest today.
Oh, Donna, you're wonderful. I really appreciate uh, your kind introductions every time. It's wonderful to be back together in our family library, right? I mean, we sort of like to consider ourselves as a family. And boy, we have a treat today. We have with us today Brittan Heller, the famous Brittan Heller. Uh, Brittan is not only is a great friend, but she is amazing in terms of what she's doing, looking at the ethics side of virtual reality. Now, Brittan graduated from Stanford with a bachelor's, and a master's degree in English, and went on to Yale and earned her degree in law from Yale. And she started out working for the Justice Department, and then she had a stint with the Anti-Defamation League, where she was the first person to be involved in technology and society and in that organization. And then of late, she now is as counsel at Foley Hoag, which is a firm that concentrates on corporate uh, uh, ethics and especially working with nonprofits and other corporations and things like that. And in addition to that, she is a fellow at the Harvard School and at the Harvard Kennedy School and the Carr Center there, and has recently published an amazing document about basically reimagining reality and the implications of immersion and how we need to be taking care about that. And I'm sure she'll be talking about that a little bit later. And then, of course, she's also a member of the board of directors of the Virtual World Society. Just a nice little vignette. And picking up on her, doing a little homework. I found out that actually Brittan was a winner of the Teen Jeopardy contest, right? And
Yes,
and
that
you
if you
go ahead.
back in the 90s when I had weather girl hair. We all had weather girl hair.
And so you used you won it, and you used the some of the money that you got from that, the prize
Mhm.
money, to pay for your education. Is that right?
I did. Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I got a Furby, which in the late 90s may have meant that I had really reached like heights of success. So
Oh yeah, and many things. She's quite an adventurer. She might bring some of those things out too. And I gather that you are a guide and a wilderness first response person in the Big Sur
Mhm.
area. You've done that, and she's traveled around the world. Just an amazing, wonderful person. And so we're honored to have you with us today. Brittan, this is a choice opportunity for us to take this other look, this other perspective of VR. Now, let's start off and ask a few questions, get to know you about sort of your heritage, your roots,
Mhm.
and tell us about your childhood, what it was like. You grew up in East Los Angeles, I believe. Is that
I
right?
did. I did.
Yeah.
I'm from East LA. I grew up in a Mexican and Jewish household, which tends to surprise a lot of people, but it happens in LA. We so we had wonderful food, a really big family, and I am the oldest of three. So I have a younger brother and a younger sister. My sister is a child psychologist. My brother is an underwater welder.
Wow.
It's
Yeah.
yeah.
So what?
My mother
the-
my mother's
okay.
an educator, and my father was a police officer
Wow. In LA, he was.
in LA.
Wow. Yeah. So, what was it like growing? What were your interests when you were growing up? Um,
Oh goodness.
what did you like to do? What kind of hobbies did you have, and what got you all excited about what you do today?
Reading. I The family would always joke that I I would read anything you put in front of me from a very early age. There's that, and then when I was a teenager, I got the opportunity to go with my aunt on this around the world trip. My uncle got sick, so I used all the money that I had saved to buy a car to instead buy his ticket. And I calculated how many
Really?
days I could miss from that year in high school and still pass. And I took them all at once. So
Oh,
that sort of
uh,
hooked me, and my parents used to joke that it ruined me because that got the travel bugs started.
uh-huh. So, so you like to read, and I gather a voracious reader. But what got you into law? I mean, you
Oh,
went to Stanford initially in English, and
yes.
then you got into law. Now, how did that happen?
I had this experience on a field trip when I was about 13 years old. I was in 8th grade, and they took us to the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles. And I don't know if you've been there, but the experience is such that they'll give you a little card. And this little card has the biography of a child who experienced the Holocaust. And I thought it was a joke, but I got a card with my last name on it. And as you
Wow.
go through the museum, you get to follow the experience of this child and see what happened to them. And it turns out that the person that I accidentally got the card from it was a distant relative. So I'd
Amazing.
never thought about that before because I grew up in my mom's like culturally Mexican household, and so
Mhm.
it just got me thinking about issues related to the Holocaust and then to wider genocides. And I decided that I wanted to study international criminal law. So I went from just studying Holocaust narratives to actually trying to be able to do something on the accountability side. My first job after law school was working at the International Criminal Court as one of the prosecutors on the first cases. When I joined the Justice Department, I was in the Human Rights and Special Prosecution section. So I prosecuted genocide, war crimes, human trafficking, and transnational violent crime. I also then took a special role knowing that there wasn't going to be a paper trail anymore like there was in the Holocaust. So I became the CHIP, which is the computer hacking and IP specialist. And that was one of the ways that I started to combine technology and human rights.
And then apparently that led you into the job with the Anti-Defamation League. Is that right?
It did, yeah. So I was the first person they had hired to look at the impact of more civil rights than human rights. And so basically the same thing, but civil rights are about equal representation under the law. And so this was looking at issues about discrimination and justice and fair treatment for all people, and how I took the job in the end of 2015, so right before things got kind of nuts in the US. So it was a very opportune time to take that role.
Wow. And so then that led you certainly away. That's when we first got acquainted. And
Yeah,
what happened when you were working there? And actually, you appeared on stage at AWE talking about a number of the issues that you saw coming up. What did you see as emergent there in that experience?
I was really entranced by the power of augmented reality and virtual reality to take these abstract issues and really personalize them for for an audience or for an individual. At AWE, I talked about this project that I had done with virtual reality and taking the entire corpus of U.S. hate crime stats. First, digitizing them because they all existed in FBI spreadsheets, and then putting them in an interactive form, which was an interactive map. So you could actually narrow down to your hometown and you could see the range of reported hate crimes over time and who was being targeted and how it changed. And we were able to pull statistical insights from the whole body of data because nobody had ever looked at the whole body. And it was actually a great tool for training law enforcement. They could put police officers or people involved in civil rights in there, and when they looked at their hometown or their home state, and then when they looked at the general trends, they actually saw that when you're looking at hate crimes, it's counterintuitive. You really want to have a higher number reported, because what that means is that when bad things happen, people are going to the police. Lower numbers didn't mean you had a lower incidence of hate crimes. It meant that people were scared to get help. And we were able to also show that the one thing that impacted the incidence of hate crimes was having crimes on the books at a state-based level. Because originally, and mandating that people report, because originally it'd go way up and then it would drop. It was a really interesting tool to show government officials how they could do a better job rather than just collecting the statistics. And it wouldn't have been possible if we didn't put it in VR and let people grab their home state and drag it
cool.
forward and really toggle the data so they could personalize it, and felt like they came to those conclusions themselves. So it was really fun.
So then you moved on to Foley Hoag.
Yes.
And now tell us about that firm and what kind of work you're doing there.
I love my law firm. Don't tell anyone, because that's a very uncool thing for a lawyer to say, but I love working there. We started off as a civil rights based firm, and we still do that now. In fact, I'm on the board, and there's a foundation. So the law firm started a foundation with the proceeds from this seminal civil rights suit. And we actually just announced yesterday that we're going to be doing a special disbursement round for organizations that are working on preventing violence or discrimination against Asian and Asian Pacific Americans. So if anyone in the audience has any leads on that, you should definitely email me and let me know, because we're going to be soliciting organizations to apply for grants. My practice is in the global business and human rights section. So what I do is I work with companies all over the world, mostly in social media and the immersive industry. And we work on how do you really build human rights into your DNA. So some of the way this looks, it's not like normal lawyer work, like contracts and some lawsuits, but not a lot of them. For example, I'm doing a human rights impact assessment for Facebook right now on the impact of hate speech on their India market. For other companies, I'm developing ethical AI codes of conduct, and for other ones, I break their toys. So I get to look at it's really fun. I get to look at the beta of their product or their policies, and I get to tell them how somebody might manipulate that or misuse that, and what they want to think about if they want to take a proactive stance towards business and human rights. It's really fun, and it kind of feels like the same work, but on the preventative end of the scale instead of the triage.
Now, you also just recently won a case against the Trump administration, I believe.
I did.
Is that something you want to talk about?
Yes. So I was part of a trial team at Foley, and our client was the Open Society Institute Justice Initiative. Individual plaintiffs were 4 professors who used to work at the International Criminal Court, but since in 2016, the Trump administration said we will issue sanctions against any individual who cooperates with the Trump administration. We thought that was actually an illegal imposition on these individuals' freedom of association, on their freedom of speech, and on their ability to work. So we filed suit, and last Friday we won. So the government decided that they were going to withdraw that executive order, and now I'm in the process of wrapping up the case to make sure that all of the plaintiffs sort of feel secure that they will be able to work in the future without getting criminal sanctions placed against them, or and that the executive order that the Biden administration issued is appropriately protective. So
Wonderful.
It's real.
Wonderful.
It's really fun. I know I sound like a boring lawyer right now, but it's really exciting. It's really exciting stuff.
Well, something that's exciting, of course, to us is at the Kennedy School, at the Carr Center at the Kennedy School. I had a fellowship to work on this whole new thing of immersive technology, and
Yeah,
looking at the implications of that. In
that was
this
wonderful.
paper,
Mhm.
gosh, it was. By the way, to everyone, this is an amazing paper. It's well researched. She's taken this whole issue of immersion and the human rights side of it, security, the ethics, and trying to get the big picture of what this is all about, and addressing a number of issues that you saw. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I was one of the first technology and human rights fellows at the Carr Center for Human Rights at Harvard Kennedy School. My project was it started off looking at content moderation and AI and how that intersected with human rights. And then I narrowed it down to focusing on immersive technology specifically, because when I tried to research it, I found no other resources on it. So there were some papers Tom had written, there were a few other things that kind of related, like the work of Jessica Outlaw, that relates very directly, and some of the ethics work of Kent By, but there wasn't really a legal treatment of it. So the paper talks about, there's a Harvard paper, and then there's also a paper in the Vanderbilt Journal of Law and Technology. And it talks about, on the legal side, how biometrics law doesn't actually cover the harms that we can anticipate in VR, AR, MR, and XR.
Tell us about biometrics. Tell us what you mean by biometrics.
As a lawyer, this was really horrifying, because everybody thinks, biometric means measurements of the body, and that's the way that all of the HMDs we have on our face work. Biometrics under the law, it's dependent on state law, and it's really tied to the concept of your identity. However, if you're in an immersive environment, we all signed in here, with various accounts tied to our credit cards. The companies and the providers, they know who we are. That's not the issue. So I had to actually invent a term, which is really, really exciting if you're like a fledgling academic, that you actually get to invent a term. Very, very geekily, but biometric psychography is what I think the actual potential harm is when you're looking at an immersive environment. And by that, I mean when the measurements that the device takes in order to operate and function are combined with your reaction to stimuli in an immersive environment. So basically the hardware and the software allows you to record both the stimuli and what you're reacting to. That is really valuable. And in an environment where many companies still haven't figured out how to appropriately monetize their business models, I think it could be quite risky. I opened the paper with an example. Pretend that you and I are in a racing game, and I see this red McLaren sports car. And ooh, do I like this red McLaren? I want this red McLaren. And so what happens physically to me when I see this car? Well, my pupils, they dilate, and my heart rate starts to get a little faster, and my skin gets a little more moist. And the sensors that are available in many consumer VR headsets, and in some of the next generation, like they announced them yesterday, they're going to actually cover all of these capabilities in a commercial setting. It knows. It can pick up these biological indicators. I like what I see. So pretend later on, I go into my web browser or to other immersive environments, and I start getting advertisements. First for Geico car insurance, and then reminding me to renew my license, and then for other new cars. That is a capability that's actually not against the law. So this type of information about what you like, and combining your consumer preferences with the way your body reacts to that that you don't have control over. That is biometric psychography right there. And that scares me because this is the closest thing to reading your mind. The other type of information that you can get out of a VR headset, I don't think people consent to give that type of information away. So one example is through pupillometry, can actually tell if somebody is has a psychological or neurological disorder in some instances. You can tell if somebody has ADHD, or if somebody has schizophrenia, or somebody is at risk and is developing Parkinson's disease. Because it's the reaction time of your pupils that's one of the first indicators to that before you show any other clinical symptoms. And I don't really consent to giving information about my mental health away when I play a racing game. You can also tell who somebody is sexually attracted to based on their physiological reactions, and if somebody is telling the truth or not. So I think that the human rights related risks, if we don't kind of cabin off the appropriate uses of data, are leaking out and don't even realize we're giving away. I want to make sure that people don't have to censor themselves or their feelings in a way that truly impinges on their freedom of expression in a way. I don't want to have to control what I think when I'm in a VR environment. So these are things that sound a little bit like Black Mirror. I know, I am the Black Mirror. So that's my practice. But this is all possible with the type of hardware that we have now. And so we should be thinking about data in a way beyond the type of usages that we're familiar with in the online context, in sort of the internet, because this is different because of the characteristics of immersion, where Tom had some great quotes in the paper. I had to do all these firsthand interviews with people because there were no other sources. So with this, it really laid home, like, Drew, I don't know the idiom in English. It really made me think about if you're harassed in virtual reality, it feels like somebody's assaulting you in real life. So these other type the characteristics of immersion to me make this a fundamentally different software than the internet. And I feel like content creators and companies need to think about these things and treat them in a slightly different way than they do other type of online targeting.
Wow, this might be a good time to ask the audience about some maybe experiences they feel that they've had where the technology has been an instrument to either harass or provide a means for harassment or an invasion of privacy, things like that. Why don't we open it up to have any experiences that you might want to relate about or concerns about this?
And
Okay, I've amplified your voice then. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. I just wanted to say, when I was younger, I would always I grew up in the, and I don't know if a lot of people actually know what I mean when I say this, but I grew up during the Black Ops 2 and Modern Warfare 3 lobby days where people was just hurling insults at everyone. And I don't know if anyone else is taught to be like this nowadays. You just kind of have to roll with what they say and just kind of learn to throw it back at them. That's kind of just what I've learned, and I want to understand what would you say if someone would say that too? What would you say how to handle that situation in a different way if you can't get away from that besides just turning your console off or whatever?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think what you're talking about, if I can rephrase your question, is if you encounter a situation somebody is being abusive in an immersive environment. Are you talking about an immersive environment or online or both either?
Sorry. Hang on one. Oh yeah, you should still be able to speak, Sen.
Go for it.
Here, I'm gonna try unmute yourself again and you should be good.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, because I think when we talk about like immersive things, like whether it be like alt space or VR or just any type of online platform, I think it's just a ground for anything to just start growing. So I feel like it's applicable to many different types of things, and it could happen anywhere, type of thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. The type of things that I've seen work in sort of the internet-based environment are, and understanding that that's a little different because there isn't the interpersonal interaction in the same way as it is in immersive environments. There are a couple things that that you can do. It's if you see somebody else being accosted like that, it's the same sort of things that you do with bystander training for civil rights, where if you go and try to actually engage the person who's doing that kind of and get their attention away from their target, that can work. You can also start paying a lot of attention to the person being targeted, and that if you just go up to someone and be like, "Oh, do you have cats? I have 2 cats. How many cats do you have? Tell me about your cats," and have the person face you, and that can actually dissuade people as well, because nobody likes to be ignored when they're talking. So if you can sort of divert that attention. If you're designing a virtual world, there's a couple things that you can do. One is make sure that the space has really good, and I think Laurel pointed this out to me, really, really great terms of service. And you know what, when you're signing in here, it says, remember that there's a person on the other side of the screen, make sure you make a good impression. If you make user expectations and rules quite clear, then people are inclined to follow them more.
So, any other things that people want to bring up, experiences in this regard?
Keely is
We'll have a
next up.
time for questions. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So mine is an experience, just a small one. So my husband was looking for a gift to buy me, a hat. I have lots of hats, crazy hat lady here. And his surprise was kind of ruined because we share the same, like, internet or whatever. And then Facebook or, social media picked up that he sourced hats. And then I started getting ads for hats. And I was like, is someone buying me a hat? Why am I getting hat pictures? And then he gave it to me as a surprise, and he was all like, here you go. And I was all happy. But then I was like, I had an inkling because of the privacy and whatnot. So just kind of an example of that.
Any others?
Okay, next up is Dr. Kobe. Go for it. You can unmute yourself.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Excuse me, Brittan. I'd be interested to know your opinion on the cyberbullying that happens in alt space is obvious, and people can become intimidated quite easily. I see it daily. But what I would wonder is what your opinion is as we approach the uncanny valley, as we get more and more realistic. Do you see a diminutive effect that maybe people are not so emboldened by their anonymity? Maybe they are more intimidated by the actual physical presence of somebody being more realistic. How do you see that?
That is a really good question. If you look at internet-based social media, there's actually everybody assumes that anonymous identities and anonymous presence on the web is going to lead to more harassment. It actually turns out to not be the case, and the reason that happens is because in any space we're in right now, even if we all had screen names, and I was Fluffy Bunny 23, I would still have a reputation within the social space. So you would know me as Fluffy Bunny 23. I would have kind of the friendships and social stature and all these other things that really seek translating from the kinetic universe into online presence and into alt space. So what they found was, what researchers found was, it wasn't the incidents of anonymized screen names that prevented harassment. It was actually having people create heuristics and strong social expectations in the space that you were in. So if it was known that harassment would be tolerated or even encouraged in a space, it didn't really matter to people if they were using a screen name or not. And that is kind of counterintuitive. So that's why things like making the rules short and clear, it has a much bigger impact than requiring people to use their real name. If you're looking for examples of this, South Korea is where I like to look at. I was a loose scholar in South Korea, which is like the roads for lazy people who like to travel. So they let you the cultural exchange fellowship rather than a degree granting program. I worked with the equivalent of the ACLU in Korea, the Korean Public Interest Lawyers Group. And while I was there, online harassment was a huge issue in South Korea. Huge issue. They had a lot of prominent celebrity suicides. And so they made a real ID law requiring people to sign on to the internet with the equivalent of their social security number. And it didn't reduce harassment. It actually made people, the reports back were that it made people censor themselves more in political speech and in other ways because they were very afraid that their online activity would be monitored and tracked to them. But it didn't stop the harassment. So.
Now, do you feel that the physical, the visual presence has will change any of that?
Yes and no. Yes, in the way that if I like all of the avatars we have here today, because one other way to reduce harassment is to show eyes. So if you think back to video games, all the monsters have these mean, small, little scrunched faces, and you don't really make eye contact with somebody you're trying to kill in a first-person shooter game. Even showing a small snippet of somebody's eyes and have an impact on reducing harassment against users in a platform. So in that way, it can rehumanize people. And on the other hand, I don't see it as being as replicating the kinetic world completely. In that many of the platforms are building in protections like a personal space bubble that I think will prevent some of the intimidation like you're talking about. And to me, this shows that platforms can really look to social psychology and other type of heuristics to replicate the ways that we keep ourselves safe in one-to-one interactions and build those into a VR environment.
Excellent, very excellent. Thank you for your information. And by the way, Shalom Aleichem.
Thank you. I think you should have a radio show because you have this wonderful, warm voice, and I would listen to it. I would listen to it.
Maybe we want you up here and in that seat before too long.
I'm actually an ex-professor at the University of Redlands here in Southern California, but thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, Brittan, let me ask you a few more questions. Then we want to turn it open to open questions from the audience. So, you now on the board of directors of the Virtual World Society. What is it that? So what? Thank you, and thank you for being a part of our family, our leadership. And so, tell us what it was that you felt about the Virtual World Society that attracted you to this part in it.
Seem to be the Virtual World Society, if you're not familiar with it, really looks to preserve the humanitarian purposes that we can have for this type of technology. And like Tom says, it's really this is akin to a splitting the atom type moment, and I really believe that. And the first time I went into VR, it felt like magic. You know, one of my favorite things to do is put people in a headset who've never done it before and to watch their reaction. My grandmother is going to be 100 years old next month. And the last time I saw her in person before the pandemic, I put her in a headset, and I put her in the blue. So she got to do the experience with the gigantic life scale blue whale, and there you look eye to eye.
Yes, the blue.
And I recorded her doing that, and it just she was like a child again, just with the wonder in her voice and the amazement, and she was like, "This is incredible! It's just incredible!" I thought this should be a commercial for this headset because I'd buy it. But psychologically, it was also interesting to me too, because I do human rights law, I do human rights work, and I asked her, I said, "Grandma, what happened?" And she's like, I was under the ocean, I was on the deck of the ship, and the fish came, and the jellyfish, and the turtles, and it was amazing." And I said, "That is so fascinating to me, Grandma, because what really happened was we put a headset on your face, and we dialed up the volume. You watched a video and listened to a soundtrack. That's what really happened, but that's not what you perceived." And so kind of the disconnect for me, where the actual reality of immersion, that's why I called the paper Reimagining Reality or Reimaging Reality, depending on how you read it. So that's why I wanted to join the Virtual World Society and work with their leadership, because this is a chance to do it right. This is a chance to sort of escape some of the online harms that we've seen permeate other technologies by being more mindful and deliberate about the decisions that we make, and to realize certain things that we assumed were default in previous platforms and mediums don't have to be that way. We have choices, and we can choose to use this for social good, or we can decide that it's just going to go the way it goes.
Left to the default of industry. That's what concerns us. That if there is no heart, there's no conscience. What happens? We've seen the default in the game industry being games of violence. You keep score of how successful you are by practicing killing people, and you talk up that number, and so there are a number of challenges in this whole area to be in a humanitarian mode, and you in your paper have you've listed and articulated a number of these problems, but you also articulated a number of solutions. And in particular, and you all need to read this paper. It's amazing discussion paper. That one of the things in there that you articulated was that we need a code of ethics that can be a beacon, a guideline for the industry. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So one thing that my law practice does is we advise people on how their company or their government should adhere to the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. These are also called the Ruggie principles. And when people talk about basically the short non-legal way of describing what this means, governments have a responsibility to protect their citizens, and so governments protect your human rights, and companies have an obligation to respect human rights. So we help basically either party figure out what that actually means in practice. So a lot of it with remedy or creating measures for what happens when something goes wrong. But one of the things that you can do is you can do human rights impact assessments. Just like when you go to when you feel sick, you go to the doctor and they give you a diagnosis, and then they give you a prescribed treatment. It's the same sort of thing for a company. In social media, they have what's called the Global Network Initiative, and this is a multi-stakeholder initiative. So companies, nonprofits, governments, investors, all these people coming together, and they evaluate, my law does these evaluations, how the company is respecting human rights and how they are in adherence with human rights law. And we give them concrete recommendations for their business. This happens every 2 years for most major tech companies that join this club, basically. What I would love to see for the immersive industry is thinking about an industry-wide code of conduct, where we all think about these ethical issues before they're huge problems and make commitments, even if we don't know at this point how those will manifest. So not in a way that will squelch innovation and all of us creating more magic, but in a way where we agree on some of the uses, on some of the harms, and some of the ways we're going to respect privacy and deal with the challenges of having our users' data. I think that's that's kind of what it would be in sort of normal people talk.
Normal people. You calling us
No,
normal? You know?
I don't know if I'd call this normal, but the less lawyerly you can make the language, the more it makes sense, right? To me, this makes a lot of sense. One of the projects that I'm looking at doing next is since I work a lot with hate speech, that's one of the focuses of my work and my practice. I'm writing a paper about how hate speech in post-colonial contexts actually looks different than hate speech in the American context, which most of the content moderation regimes for all these companies are built around. So I did a lot of field work before the pandemic in rural Uganda to figure out what hate speech looks like in their local environment and how that context comes up and abuts and sort of conflicts with other contexts that are happening due to the colonial history of Uganda. So that's one. But the one that I'm going to do after that's over, I have to finish that in a month. Really want to look at immersive harms and try to create almost a taxonomy of them where you're looking at severity of the harm by the number of people who are impacted by the harm and really map these out, because I feel like there's a disconnect between privacy advocates, between consumers, and between companies. And I think they're all focused on different things. And so I don't have a working title for this yet. I was started talking to another author to collaborate on this week, but what do we talk about when we're talking about privacy in an immersive environment? And does some other scholars are doing work on this right now, but what do we privilege and what do we not? Is companies want market share, but consumers want ease of use, but privacy advocates are really focused on advertising over biometrics and any other type of prevalent harm. So when we all say we need more privacy, we're all talking about different, very different things. So we can say yes, and then nobody will be satisfied by the result. So I'd like to sort of lay out the implications of the way we talk about how these environments work and the risks that can be built into the hardware or software if we're not cognizant of them.
Well, how Brittan, do you think the virtual world society can help with this? Providing this kind of a new way of bringing in these issues into the mix and become a leader in that.
First is, I think if you're not a member yet of the Virtual World Society, you should definitely join. It's a great group, and if you are here today and you care enough about these issues, I think you should definitely take the extra step and become a member, so you can meet other people who are like-minded, and you can talk about these ideas with. Second is, I think we can look at some of the programming that the Virtual World Society is doing, like this, in partnership with educators in VR, that really emphasizes for people who aren't familiar yet with VR, this is the kind of magic you can do. It's not just about falling off buildings or making yourself look like a flying toaster. Normally, my avatar is a flying toaster, so this is a new look for me. And for those of you who remember the Microsoft screensaver, all the better. We're in that generation together. But really, really supporting content creators and organizations that are demonstrating type of beneficial humanitarian uses of this technology. And whether or not that's going to a Patreon and financially supporting them, or getting your local newspaper to write about this, or talking to your school district about how are we going to use this technology when we all come back. If we all don't come back and the pandemic goes wave after wave after wave, yeah. How are we going to interact with each other and deal with each other in a virtual space in a way that really feels meaningful to our children? How, in a way, if they can't sit next to each other, can they do something like this? And I also think looking at the Virtual World Society and the relationship it has, or it will develop with some of the content creators or the companies, to really push them on issues like, do you respect human rights? What does human rights mean to you? Do you respect diversity? Does diversity mean to you? I'm really tickled that I can actually look like I do in real life in alt space. That's great. And it's actually very important for me, because normally when I sit in a meeting, there aren't a lot of people who have a similar identity to me. So it means a lot. But how do we create a virtual world that replicates best parts of the kinetic universe and really augments those? And how do we create an environment where everybody feels like they have a space, they have a right to be there, and they can and they can fully belong in these immersive environments? That's very important to me.
Wonderful. Thank you. So let's take some time, some of the remaining time we have left, is to open up the floor for questions that people may have for you. Okay?
Absolutely. And we've got people, a list of people that want to ask you questions. Now, Roxanne, I'm going to amplify you. You've been going in and out, and so I hope it works for you. Can you unmute
Oh my
yourself?
gosh.
I know,
Yeah.
I'm sorry you've been having problems. Go ahead. We can hear you. Oh no, did she cut out again? Hang on, Roxanne. Sorry, I closed my screen. Okay, okay, try unmuting yourself one more time. We'll see if
Okay.
this works. There you go.
How's that?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much. I am just like, I have a million questions, but I'll narrow it down to one. As an educator, I'm very concerned with children in this virtual space. And I've been in alt space many times, and I'm a proud member of the Virtual World Society. Thank you. Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry if you hear that. I don't know if you hear that. That's in the real world. My real phone's ringing. But oh my gosh, I have to ask you this. So just ignore that if you can. What can we do to have a code of ethics for children?
You cut out, and I think you said, what can we do to have a code of ethics for children?
Like the children, like in the online environment in the United States, we have COPA, Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, and the CIPA, and those are very hard to enforce. And I'm very concerned on how we're going to protect our children in the online environment. In alt space, I've witnessed some events, and I've observed some things with really harsh language. I don't know if it would be hate. So crossing that line, it's going to need a specificity on what is hate speech. And definitely there's been psychological harm to children, I believe, I can't prove it, in this space, emotional harm. And the UK as a country, we know, has bullying laws, but I'm not sure what other that protect.
that are really odious and offensive and kind of nasty speech are covered by the First Amendment, unless they incite violence or meet some of the other exceptions like fire in a crowded theater, things like that. However, if you look internationally across freedom of expression laws around the world, there are certain threads that run through most legal systems across the world. And there's a different conception of hate speech and privacy and all of that in the UK and Europe than there is in the United States. So in the UK and Europe, they take more of a protective stance, and it's more freedom from this. In the United States, it's more of a freedom of expression-based perspective, where it's freedom to express yourself. So there's a different role for the government when you're thinking about laws that protect you from something and give you the ability to do something. So positive rights versus negative rights. That's kind of how they phrase it. I actually think that the best thing that can be done, and some of the things that I've worked on in anti-bullying with UK-based organizations, are really empowering educators and parents who have the resources to talk to their children. Like you said, laws are spotty and are hard to enforce. The best thing you can do is create a strong, independent, ethical little person. And really help them understand what it means to empathize with someone else.
Yeah.
I put educators on the same level as parents, because when we were doing the research for creating this international anti-bullying campaign, that's what the children kept coming back and telling us, that for many of them, the person in their life that they looked to in this kind of a role, it wasn't always a parent, but oftentimes it was a teacher or a coach or a religious leader that kind of had almost a co-parenting type role with them. So I would not shy away from hard conversations with young people about this. No, that's not the answer you were looking for, but I do feel like that is one of the most effective and simplest things, and it's something that everybody can do.
Okay, thank you so much. And Roxanne, I'm glad that we were able to get the question. You guys, we have a long queue and only a couple minutes. So I'm going to ask that you keep your question as short as possible and just limit it to one question, and we'll see how many we can get through in the next couple minutes, okay? So NGC, you're next. Caitlin, you'll be right after NGC.
Hello, my name's NGC. Immersive technologies are so new, but in this sense, this is a social media. So how, when there's no reasonable expectation of privacy, do we actually protect our privacies? And how do we pursue those that violate us personally? Like filing a John Doe lawsuit to find out an ISP provider, or, actually creating accountability in these environments as far as security and things are applied.
The best way that I've seen accountability work is kind of more of a function based off of the way that contracts operate. This is interesting. The terms of service of these platforms, that's really what you're going off of. It's very, very hard. And I know this because I brought the first cyber harassment lawsuit. It is very, very hard to file a criminal suit just because of the ephemerality of data and the burden of proof and proving the harms. So oftentimes when you're filing a civil suit, you need to show that you have a demonstrated harm, like a financial harm. And it's harder to prove a privacy-based type of a harm. When I used to work with the Anti-Defamation League, we would encourage people when when you saw something that violated the terms of service, and now the terms of service are much more encompassing than they were back then, make sure you report it. That is the fastest way to get redress. by going through the company mechanisms. And if you can't get redress that way, then going to a special interest group that really addresses the type of harm that you're experiencing, because they can also poke a company in a way if they're not responding to you individually. When you file a lawsuit, nobody really wins. It's really long and arduous and not always designed for individual enforcement, more corporate level enforcement for ease. So you can also give feedback to companies and be very vocal about the type of terms of service that you want to see, because if it's not actually protective of you and the group you represent or your identity, you actually want to hear that, because that's a feedback loop that's very, very valuable to them, because they don't want to lose customers. So.
Thanks so much, Angie. See you, Brittan. Caitlin, go ahead.
Okay. Brittan, I've been loving this whole talk. It's amazing and wonderful. And I'm thinking about this term, biometric psychography. I love that term. So applauding you for coining it. I'm wondering if you've linked any of the research to things like emotion tracking and some of the research up at Dartmouth. And I just keep thinking also about VWS and the way that moving from protecting and respecting to actually advancing human rights, maybe a way to merge that with the Alliance for Good that we're forming at VWS. Do you think any of that research could converge in some actual metric that we could help advance and establish? So thank you very much.
I found my emoji button. So
yeah, I've been spending them all day. Yeah.
I really like the idea of moving from protect and respect to advancing. It's kind of, again, my preference when dealing with human rights issues is to go beyond triage to prevention, and to look at ways before somebody is hurt to actually address potential harms. So I really, really, really like that idea. And I know I owe you an email and a call, so we should talk about that more later. What was the, and you had a first part of your question, which was
well, your work on the biometrics and actually that biometric linking of the physiography. Yeah.
The interesting thing for me is when you look at biometrics law, it's covered by state law, but they're not all consistent. So Illinois is the most restrictive, and now there are other laws that don't go along with that level. It means that there's a lot of uncertainty for VR companies and AR companies and content creators about if they want to sell nationwide, what sort of level do they have to meet? When you're looking at emotion recognition, their biometrics law talks about facial geometry. And so my question would really be, how do those individual technologies that claim to recognize emotions, how do they work? Do they take a static image of you and analyzing a bunch of images sequentially? Is it analyzing a film that in itself is a whole roll of static images? Is it an algorithm that learns from itself? These can all lead to different outcomes under the way that the individual state laws are formed based on how the technology works. So the fact that I don't think we can legislate or regulate to the industry before, like previous previous tacks all the way through the present day have taken. I think you really need to look at how individual technologies work and the individual harms that exposes people to. And if you were a privacy lawyer, this would be a very controversial thing for me to say. But the fact that all of these technologies are now coming into the fray and interacting with each other in ways that we did not anticipate, or that the level of complexity is very different than radio stations and televisions. It has more of an individualized impact. So I think we need to have a more individualized approach into quantifying and defining harms.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Donna.
So that brings us to the end of, can you believe it?
Mm,
Another one
well,
is over. Time goes by so fast. Oh, the conversation's just been incredible. Thank you so much to both of you, Tom for hosting
you
this, and
bet.
for Brittan for giving such such an interesting conversation for today again. So thank you everybody for coming. We're going to unmute you, and I'm not sure how long Tom and Brittan can stay around, but maybe if you can stay around for a couple
Yes,
minutes just
Yeah.
to chat with a
we,
couple people, that would be
yeah,
really wonderful. And Tom, do you want to say anything about the next event, or
yes,
I
I
just
would
want to
like
give you
Caitlin.
space?
Yes,
Okay.
Caitlin, would you come up real fast and tell us about this, what's coming up?
Sure. I can just speak to it.
You
The
from
Earth
there,
Day.
okay? That'd be fine.
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, I'll go rapid fire. Earth Day World Tour is really, again, it's right in line with us advancing the future of immersive technology to talk about all of the environmental issues that are really important right now. And we thought, well, why talk about them in one space? There's so many different places and worlds in VR that can illuminate things, such as going into the ocean and talking about oceanography and environmentalism, and a few other locations that are going to be surprises. So if you do want to attend, we highly encourage you to go online and sign up, because there will be limited space, and it's going to be a form of world jumping and also having questions in each location that drive the discussion. So if you have any questions about it, you can reach out to me. And you can also look on our website at VWS. We have it on the calendar already. So thank you very much. That's
Thank you,
my little
Caitlin.
infomercial. Yeah.
Hopefully you
Sure.
can be with us on the Earth Day World Tour. Now, Brittan, thank you once again for this. And
Thank you.
what an
This was a privilege. So thank you all for coming too.